My boss gave the promotion to his nephew instead of me and said I was only good at making tea. I put my resignation on his desk, but he had no idea that the company's biggest client was leaving with me. The first call to the office on Monday morning changed everything. I put my resignation on my desk that day when my boss gave his nephew in front of the entire team the position I had spent 7 years working nights, weekends, client dinners, airport lounges, and making the quiet sacrifices that never appear in any payroll system to earn. And then he laughed and said, "Maria, you're good, but leadership isn't for you. You're only good at making tea." A few people in the room laughed, a few lowered their eyes, and others held their coffee cups as if something very important had suddenly appeared in their hands. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, and I didn't remind anyone that the reports I created had helped the company achieve its largest revenue growth in 3 years, or that I knew the real fears, objections, budgets, and deadlines of the clients they tried so hard to impress in the boardroom. I simply closed my laptop, pushed my chair back slightly, and looked at the man who believed he had the power to decide both my worth and the amount of respect I deserved. His name was Harold Bennett, but everyone at the office called him Mr. Bennett, as though there were an invisible crown attached to his name. He lived in an old suburban home outside Boston, talked about family values every Thanksgiving, wrote notes about loyalty in the company newsletter, and handed employees bottles of cheap wine every December while reminding us that we were all one big family. That word had always made me tired, family, because in an office, people usually remembered it when they needed someone to work late without complaining. I had joined the company as a junior account coordinator when my daughter was still in kindergarten. I sat through PTA meetings pretending to be the perfectly organized mother, even though spreadsheets waited on my kitchen table at night. The dishwasher ran in the background, and I wrote quarterly proposals while drinking the bulk coffee I bought during our traditional Sunday Costco trips. My husband, David, talked about retirement plans and 401k contributions as though life were a straight road and all you had to do was keep enough fuel in the tank. The corporate world had taught me that roads were often blocked by people who had no map, only the right last name. Harold's nephew, Evan, had joined the company 2 years earlier. He had a charming smile, an expensive watch, and a habit of dropping Harvard into conversations like seasoning. In meetings he talked about the big picture, then looked at me when anyone asked for details. On client calls he began with a confident voice, but when someone asked about numbers he shuffled through his notes while I quietly shared my screen and gave him the answer. I had saved him many times because I believed a client should never see weakness inside the company. Perhaps that was my mistake. While protecting the company, I had also protected the people who were quietly rehearsing how to replace me. Our largest client was Northbridge Foods, a national grocery distribution group whose contracts had helped move our firm from a regional operation onto the national stage. Their CFO, Linda Morales, was direct, sharp, and sometimes difficult, but she was fair. She trusted my follow-up emails more than Harold's polished speeches. She knew I understood which warehouse had compliance problems, which city was seeing delivery costs rise, and which proposal carried hidden risks because I never sugarcoated anything. Over the years, Linda and I had built professional trust slowly, without lunch selfies or LinkedIn performances, simply through consistent work. The promotion was announced on a Friday afternoon, when most people were already mentally somewhere in their weekend and managers assumed uncomfortable decisions would pass with less resistance. Harold stood in the conference room and said the company needed new energy and fresh leadership, then announced Evan as Vice President of Client Strategy. I applauded calmly because sometimes dignity is visible even in the movement of your hands. Then Harold looked at me and made the comment about tea, treating it like a harmless joke as if my age, my work, and my quiet competence were all available for office entertainment. When I went home that evening, I noticed the old Thanksgiving serving platter my mother had given me sitting in the kitchen. Suddenly, I remembered all those family dinners where everyone had performed. No one was angry, no one was tired, no one was hurt, the turkey was being carved, cranberry sauce was passed around, and everyone quietly hid their disappointments beneath polite smiles. I didn't perform that night. I told David I was resigning. He asked only, "Are you sure?" "I've been sure for longer than today," I said. I didn't spend the weekend making noise. There were no dramatic social media posts, no long messages to friends, and no attempt to feed the office gossip. On Saturday morning, I reviewed my old client records and my legally maintained personal notes, making sure I took nothing that belonged to the company. On Sunday I went to Costco as usual, bought paper towels, coffee, dog food, and the rotisserie chicken my daughter still considered comfort food. While standing in line, I wrote Linda Morales a short, professional message. I told her Friday had been my last day and that if she ever needed independent strategic advisory services in the future, I would be available. There was no complaint in the message, no emotional accusation, and no blame. People who understand the truth rarely need drama to recognize it. On Monday morning I didn't go to the office. I sat at my dining room table with my laptop open, a legal pad beside my coffee mug, while a school bus carried children down the quiet suburban street outside. Around that same time the phone rang in Harold's office. Linda Morales was calling. She told him that Northbridge Foods would not renew its contract unless Maria Alvarez remained the strategic lead on the account, and if Maria was no longer at the company, Northbridge would take its business wherever she went. I learned the details 2 days later, when Evan's assistant quietly texted me. You didn't hear it from me, but the office froze. Harold first called it a misunderstanding, then a transition issue, and finally a loyalty problem. Linda's response was simple. Business runs on trust, not family favors. I didn't feel joy when I heard that. What I felt was quieter, something like relief, as if someone had finally opened a window in a room that had been closed for too long. Harold called me twice that day, then sent an email with the subject line, "Let's resolve this," as if I were the problem, as if humiliation were a paperwork error that could be corrected. I replied that evening, "I wish the company well, but my decision is final." He mentioned a better compensation package, a revised title, and something resembling an apology. I didn't remind him that apologies become very cheap when they arrive attached to damage control. 3 months later, Northbridge became my first independent client. 6 months later I had 6 clients. A year later I leased a small office. It wasn't downtown, but it was bright, clean, and quiet. Fresh flowers sat in the center of the conference table, and no woman there was reduced to a joke about making tea. The first time I brought my daughter there, she looked around and said, "Mom, this feels like you." Perhaps that was the greatest compliment I had ever received. Today when I look back, I don't hate Harold. Hatred requires too much energy, and I prefer to spend mine on ideas, work, and peace. I learned that some people never understand your value until losing you appears on their balance sheet. My revenge was patience, my silence was strategy, and my resignation was not a defeat. It was simply a door, and on the other side of it was a place that finally belonged to me. Now, when the coffee machine starts in the morning, its sound no longer reminds me of office politics. It reminds me of freedom. I put the right piece of paper on the right desk at exactly the right time, and from that day forward, my life stopped running on someone else's approval and started running on my own decisions. If this story reminded you that knowing your worth can change everything, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful and inspiring stories. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that truly matter. Thank you so much for watching, and we genuinely appreciate you staying with us until the very end.